Thank you very much, Senator Hirono. I'm trying to remember exactly when it happened because I was a member of the Appropriations Committee and the senator from Ohio, Mike DeWine, offered a program for the District of Columbia, Opportunity, I'm trying to find the name again, but it was a voucher system in the District of Columbia, Opportunity Scholarships. And it was interesting to me. Full confession, 19 years of Catholic education. So I'm just going to lay it on the table. I thought I got a good education, and I didn't run into some of the problems that we were identifying. But I asked some basic questions when this opportunity program was created. Basic questions like, who's going to decide the quality of the teachers in these school situations? What kind of curriculum will be offered? What kind of measurement of success or failure will there be? And ultimate question, will the student be better off as a result of attending these so-called voucher schools, which included a lot of things. Here's a couple things that I discovered. The Catholic schools were fairly predictable because it's a model that's been used for decades, if not longer. But many of these schools were a last-minute creation. There were some churches in the District of Columbia where the pastor said, if my wife is the principal and my daughter is the teacher, we've got a school in the basement, so come on down. And the net result of it was not a very positive experience for these students. School didn't last long. In fact, we couldn't find many of the schools several years later when we went out to measure them. That was a problem. Then there was the question of homeschooling. And I know this because it's a family experience. I won't go into any detail, where some of my relatives decided for religious reasons that they were going to homeschool their children so they wouldn't be exposed to the terrible conduct of public school students. The net result of it was not a good one. When it was all said and done, their kids, whom they were nominally homeschooling, couldn't read and spent the rest of their lives paying for that miseducation, if it was one. So I wonder if we get into a tax credit situation, whether or not there'll be measurements to avoid the excesses which I've noted. I know that you've all spoken to this before I arrived, so I won't try to duplicate any remarks. Ms. Neese, I don't think there were many, if any, disabled children in my Catholic schools, and very few minority students. And I'm wondering what happens with these young people who are disabled when they go through this experience.
It's a great question, Senator. Some Catholic schools are doing a great job meeting the needs of kids with disabilities. Many of them won't take kids with disabilities, and certainly the families that I represent, families with kids with Down syndrome and autism and cerebral palsy that have high cost needs. Private schools don't want our kids. They don't. And with the way this bill is constructed, they wouldn't have to take them. But the state still has an obligation to educate these kids. But if we redirect public funds to private schools, you're making it that much more difficult for the public schools to meet their current obligations.
How much is built into this model to measure whether you actually have a school or just a scam?
I don't believe there's any measure.
How about the quality of the teachers of these schools?
And I think that's been our experience with those states that have had private school. I'll pick on my friend from Florida with scholarships in Florida. You don't have to be licensed. Your teachers don't have to have credentials. There's no curriculum standards you have to meet. You don't even, and so the requirements on the entity that says they're a private school are virtually non-existent. And so it's all on the parent to have to decide if that's in fact an appropriate place for their child. And by the time they learn that that's not the case, it's too late to go back to the public schools. And so people are really caught between a rock and a hard place.
Could one of you address the homeschool issue? I have run into parents in exceptional situations, who are exceptional themselves and really are prepared to dedicate hours in a day to make sure there is a homeschool experience that is meaningful and a life experience that is meaningful. But I also have seen exactly the opposite in terms of people who are purportedly homeschoolers, which in fact say, I'm not going to bore him with books. He doesn't need books. He needs life experiences. Go next door and see if you can be an apprentice to this carpenter who just asked you to haul the boards in to build the addition to the house.
So I would say that, and I'll let the educators, but I have a very dear friend who has a PhD in special education, and she got her PhD, and some of her friends were getting PhDs in a musical instrument. And her friends would say, if I don't get a job in an orchestra, I'll just teach. And she would say to them, if I don't get a job in a school, I guess I'll just join the orchestra. And her point was that there's a science and knowledge to teaching that's real, that's important, and it isn't just anybody can do it because they're nice, right? Being nice and caring about kids does not make you a good teacher. Knowing how kids learn, knowing how to teach a curriculum, knowing how some kids are different, that's what makes a good teacher. There is a skill and a science and a profound amount of knowledge that comes with being a good teacher. It doesn't magically just happen.
Any others like to comment on these questions?
I would, being from Florida, where we are in the middle of the $8,000 a year per child if you choose to homeschool. And it's kind of like the Wild West. I was attending a state board of education meeting for a different issue, and they were discussing the accountability measures with one of the providers of the company that administers the $8,000. And their answer was, we really don't have any guidelines. So if a parent, and parents did, they took their children to pet dolphins in South Florida. They took them to Disneyland. One couple said their son needed a screen for his computer, so they bought a 60-inch TV. To me, as a public school educator, I know how much that $8,000 can do for a child who's struggling to learn to read. And I also know how much skill and pedagogical knowledge I bring to that child. The best intentioned parent in the world who does not have a background in education is not going to be able to understand, diagnose, and remediate a learning disability in a child. It takes a professionally trained educator to make those decisions. And that, to me, is why a lot of children with complex learning needs remain in public schools. The money may be going to a private school or a homeschool voucher, but the child will bounce back to a public school where there is a staff of trained professionals who understand how to help Johnny learn how to read.
Dr. Henry?
Slightly different, but you already have a great example. And think about the debate for early childhood. The kids coming to kindergarten in our district, our principals can tell you without a doubt who had quality pre-K or who had parents that had time and expertise to support that child when they enter kindergarten. And then others who may say, well, we did stuff at home, but it wasn't with the same level of expertise or intensity. So the example is clear, and that's with pre-K. Having a qualified educator with time to invest, which absolutely can be a parent, but it doesn't work for everyone. That example's already there.
Are there any studies about restoring these kids to where they might have achieved if you identify that challenge?
There's very little research on homeschooling in general because we collect so little data on homeschoolers. And I mean, my view is really there are lots of different environments where kids across this country get a good education. Senator, it sounds like you got a wonderful education in Catholic schools growing up. I think there are kids who get a good education with homeschooling. For me, the question is, what is the best use of public funds and what protections we expect when we're putting public funds into a kid's education? And whether it's Catholic schools, it's homeschooling, whatever it is, when we start to talk about programs that exclude kids because they have disabilities or because they're gay or because whatever it may be, I think that's where my questions come in. But what we know about homeschooling, what we know about private education is that kids get very different experiences. Some get good, some don't get so good, but it's very hard to know in the aggregate because we just don't test those students or have much data on them.